The collapse of trust. Lucas had learned to value everything in his life: assets, power, and most of all, control. But in the sterile, cold hallway of a New York City hospital, he cast aside the most valuable thing of all: trust. Standing before him, Mia trembled, her deep blue eyes filled with a desperate plea. But his ears only heard the whispers of betrayal, and his eyes only saw suspicion. When he uttered the bitter accusation and turned his back, the sound of his polished dress shoes echoing on the marble floor didn't just close the door on their love. It slammed shut the door on the future they had once promised each other. He walked away seeking justice, seeking to affirm his pride. He had no idea that the moment he turned his back, Mia carried a piece of him, an undeniable fragment, into the frigid night of her solitude. 5 years passed. His life was one of balance sheets and corporate power. Hers was one of quiet sacrifice and fierce, unwavering love for a small, cherished life. Then, fate dragged them both back to a simple suburban park in Maplewood. Lucas stood there, still proud and composed, until his gaze fell upon the child laughing on the swing set. In the lively, striking blue eyes of the little boy named Leo, he saw not only himself, but the most devastating truth, the catastrophic consequence of his pride and his lack of faith. The child was living proof, not just that Mia was innocent, but that Lucas himself had paid a heavy price for his decision. The unexpected reunion, the sun with his eyes. He accused her of betrayal and walked away. 5 years later, he saw her again, holding the son who had his eyes. The hospital hallway was filled with the sterile scent of disinfectant, the low hum of fluorescent lights, and the muffled sounds of hurried footsteps. Mia was there, her body shaking, her eyes red from the tears she had held back for too long. She had been waiting for Lucas's arrival, clinging to the faint hope that he would understand, that he would believe her, that love was stronger than whispers and accusations. But when he finally appeared at the end of the corridor, dressed in his tailored suit, his dark hair perfectly groomed, and his blue eyes colder than she had ever seen them, she realized that hope was already slipping through her fingers. He didn't rush to her side or take her hands, as he used to in times of crisis. He stopped in front of her with a distance in his posture that spoke louder than words, a distance that told her everything had changed. Mia searched his face for any softness, any sign that the man she loved was still there beneath the anger. Instead, she saw suspicion, pain, and something even sharper: betrayal. His voice, low and measured, sliced through the air like a blade. "You betrayed me," he said, each syllable delivered with a finality, as if he had already judged her guilty. The world seemed to tilt around her. Mia tried to speak, to reach out, to explain that the rumors he had heard were lies, that she had never given her heart to anyone but him. Her lips trembled as she whispered his name, but the words came out broken and awkward. Lucas turned his head slightly, as if even the sound of her voice were unbearable. His jaw clenched so tightly she thought it might break. The man who once promised to stand by her, no matter what, now looked at her as if she were a stranger. Her chest ached with the weight of unspoken words, but before she could gather the courage to speak again, Lucas took a step back, his expression carved into stone. In his eyes, she saw not just rage, but also a flicker of sorrow, a sorrow that suggested he wanted to believe her, but couldn't allow himself to. That conflict only deepened her despair, because it meant there was love buried beneath the pain, but it was being suffocated by distrust. His silence was worse than any accusation, and when he finally turned to leave, his polished shoes tapping on the marble floor, the sound echoed like the closing of a door that would never open again. Mia remained frozen in place, her hands trembling at her sides, her throat raw with the words she hadn't been able to force out. The cold hospital air wrapped around her like shackles, and she slid against the wall, her heart fragmenting under the weight of his rejection. She wanted to chase him, to make him listen, to prove she wasn't who he thought she was. But her legs refused to move, her strength depleted by the realization that he had already made up his mind. To Lucas, the man who once swore to love her endlessly, there was nothing left but betrayal. When the sound of his footsteps finally faded into the silence, Mia pressed her hand to her stomach, unaware in that moment of the life that had already begun within her. Tears blurred her vision as she sank to the floor, her sobs muffled by the empty hallway. She felt as though the future she had dreamed of had shattered in an instant, replaced by a darkness she didn't know how to escape. And though she couldn't see it then, this wasn't the end of her story, but the beginning of a journey that would test her strength in ways she never imagined. Fertile solitude. Mia left the hospital that night with her world destroyed, and her spirit fractured in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. The city, which had once felt alive with possibility, now loomed over her as a cruel reminder of everything she had lost. She rented a small, dimly lit apartment on the far edge of New York City, a place where no one knew her name and no one asked questions. The walls were thin, the pipes rattled at night, and the single window barely let in enough light to soften the gloom. Yet, it was all she could afford, and within those walls, she carried not only her own grief, but also a secret that grew inside her. Weeks bled into months, and with each passing day, the solitude settled deeper into her bones. She worked any job she could find, washing dishes until her hands ached, cleaning offices when the rest of the city slept, serving coffee to people who never noticed her face. Every coin she earned was fiercely guarded, knowing she had to save for more than just herself. The nights were the hardest, when the silence of the apartment reminded her of the love that had been stripped away. She would sit by the window with her hand resting protectively over her stomach, whispering promises to the child yet to be born. She told him that no matter how dark the world seemed, she would fight for him, that he would never feel unwanted, that her love would be enough even if no one else stood with them. When Leo came into the world, it wasn't in a gleaming hospital room surrounded by friends and family, but in a quiet clinic with tired nurses and the buzzing of an old, barely working heater. Mia wept as she held him for the first time, overwhelmed by the sight of his tiny fingers curling around hers. He already had dark, soft, fine hair, and when he opened his eyes, she gasped, for they were the unmistakable blue she had once loved in Lucas. For a moment, her chest tightened with pain, the memory of the man who had abandoned her colliding with the present. But then Leo's tiny cry filled the room, and everything else faded away. He was hers, completely hers, and whatever resemblance he bore to his father didn't change that. The next few years were a battle of endurance. Mia quickly learned that survival required sacrifice. There were days she skipped meals so Leo would have enough to eat. Nights she stayed up sewing patches onto his clothes by the faint glow of a lamp flickering with age. She worked herself to exhaustion, sometimes falling asleep at the kitchen table with unpaid bills surrounding her, only to be roused by the sound of her son's morning laughter. That laughter was her strength, the force that propelled her forward when her body wanted to collapse. Leo grew quickly, his curiosity limitless, his spirit bright despite the hardship. He would tug on her hand at the market, asking questions about everything he saw, or sit on the floor with crayons, drawing houses with big windows and gardens they didn't have, but which he believed they would one day own. Mia marveled at his resilience, at the way he could find joy in even the smallest things. Yet every time she looked into his eyes, she was reminded of Lucas, and the old wound silently bled inside her. She tried to bury those thoughts, to focus only on the life she was building, but the shadow of the past never fully left her. Still, Mia didn't break. She told Leo stories at night, fairy tales where the heroes always came back, where promises were never broken, where love was strong enough to conquer everything. She knew she was weaving dreams not just for him, but for herself. Fragile threads of hope to cover the cracks in her heart. 5 years passed in this rhythm of struggle and small victories, and though her body carried the weight of every sacrifice, she had grown stronger. She no longer thought of herself as the fragile girl Lucas had walked away from at the hospital. She was a mother, fierce and unyielding, and her son was proof that even in the ashes of betrayal, something beautiful could be born. But deep down, beneath the walls she had built around her heart, Mia feared one thing above all else: that one day the truth of Leo's eyes, so unmistakably like his father's, would call the past back to her door. The park, an inevitable encounter. The years had transformed Mia into a very different person from the woman who once trembled in a hospital hallway. Her days were defined by routine, by the rhythm of survival, by the quiet determination that she couldn't afford to falter when someone depended entirely on her. Leo was 5 years old, his small body full of restless energy, his laughter echoing through the modest apartment like sunshine breaking through dense clouds. He was everything she had left, everything she had built her fragile world around. And yet, he was also a constant reminder of the man who had turned his back on her. Life without Lucas was never easy, but Mia had learned to live without expecting ease. She had grown used to waking before dawn, bundling Leo in a sweater that had been patched too many times, and rushing him to the small neighborhood preschool before heading to work. She juggled multiple jobs, waitressing during the day, cleaning in the evenings, sometimes staying up late sewing clothes for neighbors just to earn a few extra dollars. Her hands were always tired, her back always sore. But when Leo ran into her arms after school, resting his face in her neck and giggling about some small adventure, she felt a strength that kept her standing. His happiness was her oxygen. Their apartment was tiny, no bigger than a few rooms stacked together, but Mia worked tirelessly to make it feel like home. She painted the walls a soft cream when she could afford the paint, proudly hung Leo's drawings as if they were priceless art, and filled the shelves with second-hand books bought from garage sales. Every corner bore the mark of her effort, a testament to her determination to give Leo a life full of love, even if it lacked wealth. Yet, in the quiet hours of the night, when Leo was asleep and she was left alone with her thoughts, the weight of loneliness pressed in on her. She would sit by the window, staring out at the dark streets, and wonder if Lucas ever thought of her, if he ever wondered about the son he had unknowingly left behind. Those thoughts tormented her, though she despised herself for allowing them space in her heart. Leo, innocent of the complexities of the past, often asked questions she struggled to answer. "Mommy, why don't I have a daddy like the other kids at school?" His blue eyes would look up at her, so trusting, so open with curiosity. And each time her chest would tighten with the force of emotions she couldn't share with him. She would smile softly, stroke his dark hair, and say something vague, something like, "You have me, and that's all you need." But inside, she feared the day he would push harder, the day she would have to reveal the truth about the man whose blood ran through his veins. She feared what Leo would think of her choices, of the life she had built without his father. Despite the hardship, Mia found joy in the simple things. She loved watching Leo play in the park, his small legs pumping with clumsy determination across the grass, his laughter mingling with the sounds of other children. She loved the evenings when he would climb into her lap, insisting she read the same story for the 5th time, his head resting on her chest as he slowly drifted off to sleep. In those moments, she allowed herself to believe that love, even broken and battered as hers was, could still be enough to raise a child with warmth and hope. However, no matter how hard she tried, the past remained a shadow she couldn't fully escape. Sometimes, when she looked at Leo, when his eyes caught the light in a certain way, it was as if Lucas were staring back at her with unspoken words hanging between them. She would quickly look away, burying her face in Leo's hair, reminding herself that she had chosen this path and she was strong enough to walk it. But the truth she feared most always lingered in the back of her mind, that one day, destiny might decide that her carefully constructed world of silence and secrets was not meant to last. And though she didn't know it yet, that day was closer than she imagined. The afternoon had begun like so many others, with Mia taking Leo to the local park in Maplewood after a long day of work. The sun was beginning to dip in the sky, painting the clouds with shades of orange and pink, and the sound of children's laughter drifted on the air. Leo skipped ahead of her, his small legs propelling him with excitement as he ran toward the swings, his dark hair ruffled by the breeze. Mia followed at a slower pace, her eyes fixed on him, with that blend of exhaustion and pride that only a parent truly understands. She carried a well-worn thermos of tea, the small comfort she allowed herself, and settled onto a bench where she could watch him. These hours at the park were her salvation, moments when the heaviness of life lifted enough for her to breathe. She was sipping from the thermos when the sound of a familiar voice hit her like a sudden storm. The tone was deeper, perhaps a little older than the last time she had heard it, but unmistakable. Her heart leaped violently in her chest, and for a moment she couldn't turn her head. 5 years had passed, years filled with solitude, anger, and the determination not to look back. Yet there it was, the voice she had both dreaded and secretly longed for in her weakest moments. Slowly, almost against her will, her gaze drifted across the park, and her world tilted. Lucas was standing just steps away, his tall figure impossible to mistake, his dark hair catching the last rays of the sun, his sharp blue eyes scanning the area with the same intensity that had once both terrified and captivated her. He looked almost exactly as she remembered, though time had etched subtle lines around his eyes, and there was a heaviness to his posture that suggested he carried burdens she couldn't see. Mia's breath caught in her throat, and her hands gripped the thermos as if it were the only thing anchoring her to reality. She had envisioned this moment in nightmares and daydreams alike, but she had never truly believed it would happen. It was Leo who drew Lucas's attention. The child had climbed onto the swing and was pumping his legs awkwardly, his giggles echoing across the park. Lucas's gaze froze on him, and Mia saw the moment recognition struck. His entire body seemed to tense, his expression shifting from casual curiosity to stunned awe. He looked as if he were seeing a ghost, his blue eyes wide, his lips parted with a sharp intake of air. Mia felt panic seize her, every instinct screaming at her to grab Leo and run, to shield him from the truth she had fought so hard to keep hidden. But her legs refused to move, her body rooted to the spot by the weight of inevitability. Lucas took a step forward, then another, his eyes never leaving Leo. Mia stood up quickly from the bench, stepping into the space before he could get too close. Her voice was low and sharp when she spoke, though her heart pounded fiercely in her chest. "Stay back," she said. But even as the words left her mouth, she knew they were powerless. The resemblance was undeniable. Leo's blue eyes, his dark hair, the curve of his smile. Lucas didn't need her confirmation. The truth stood before him on the swing set. For a long moment, the two of them simply stared, the years collapsing between them like paper walls. Mia saw the shock on Lucas's face, but beneath it, she saw something deeper, something raw and painful. He looked at Leo as if the world had moved beneath his feet, as if every certainty he had clung to for the last 5 years had been ripped away in a single instant. Mia's stomach twisted because she knew what was coming. Lucas's voice, when it finally came, was raspy, almost broken. "He's mine, isn't he?" The question was barely a whisper, but it cut through her like a knife. Mia's lips trembled, and for a moment she considered lying, considered protecting the fragile life she had built by denying what was already obvious. But she couldn't. She had lived too long with the weight of secrets, too long with the shadow of his absence haunting every corner of their lives. Slowly, with a firmness she didn't feel, she looked him in the eye and gave the truth the voice it had been denied. "Yes, he's your son." Lucas stumbled backward as if the words had physically struck him. He brought a hand to his mouth, his chest rising and falling with quick breaths. Mia wanted to hate him in that moment, wanted to cling to the fury that had fueled her for years. But all she saw was a man confronted by the reality of what he had lost. The air between them was thick with everything unsaid, with accusations and regrets, with pain and longing, and Mia felt her knees buckle beneath the weight of it. She quickly turned to the swing set, calling Leo in, her voice cracking as she summoned him to her side. The boy came running, oblivious to the storm surrounding him, his smile bright, his small hand slipping easily into hers. As Mia pulled him away from the park, she could feel Lucas's eyes on them, burning into her back with a mix of shock, grief, and something she couldn't yet name. She told herself she wouldn't look back, that she wouldn't let him shatter the fragile peace she had fought for. But as she walked away, with Leo giggling at her side, Mia knew with overwhelming certainty that the past she had tried to bury had found its way back, and nothing would ever be the same. The struggle for the truth. Lucas couldn't escape the image of the child's face. He stayed up all night in his penthouse, staring at the ceiling while the city pulsed with neon lights far below, and every time he closed his eyes, he saw those startling blue eyes looking up at him, his own eyes reflected in a child's face. He had always prided himself on being logical, controlled, a man who made decisions based on facts rather than feelings. But now all that discipline crumbled under the weight of a truth he could no longer deny. The boy in the park was his son. No rumor, no denial, no carefully constructed wall of anger could erase that reality. The revelation left him shell-shocked, not just because he had been wrong about Mia, but because for 5 years he had missed moments that could never be reclaimed. The first words, the first steps, the countless nights his son had sought comfort, and he hadn't been there. The thought both emptied him and filled him with a rage, not toward Mia, but toward himself. The next day, he looked for her. He found her leaving the small preschool Leo attended, her hand resting gently on the boy's shoulder as they walked. She stopped abruptly when she saw him standing on the edge of the sidewalk, her body tensing as if preparing for battle. Lucas noticed how quickly she pulled Leo close, as if to shield him from harm, and the sight pierced him. He held up his hands in a gesture of peace, his voice low and steady, though everything in him was shaking inside. He said he only wanted to talk, only wanted to understand, and Mia's eyes blazed with suspicion as she told Leo to run ahead to the apartment. The boy hesitated, looking curiously at Lucas, but obeyed his mother, leaving the two of them standing in a silence so heavy it threatened to crush them both. Mia's voice was sharp when she finally spoke. She told him he had no right to be there, that he had relinquished any claim to her or to Leo, the moment he turned his back on her at the hospital. Her words stung like lashes, and Lucas allowed them, knowing she deserved to hurl every piece of her pain at him. He tried to explain, to tell her he had been blinded by lies and his own fear, that he had believed she had betrayed him because his world at that time was filled with people waiting to deceive him. He admitted he had chosen the coward's way, running instead of staying, punishing her for something she had never done. Mia's eyes welled with tears, though she quickly blinked them away, and her voice trembled with fury as she told him his choices had left her alone with a son, that she had endured years of struggle without his help, and that no apology could erase the scars of those nights when she thought she had nothing left to give. Lucas listened, every word striking him with brutal force, but instead of defending himself, he nodded. He told her he didn't expect forgiveness, that he knew he couldn't rewrite the past, but he wanted a chance to prove his worth now. He said Leo deserved more than a broken family and a father who had abandoned him out of pride. He said he had missed too much, and he wouldn't miss another day if he could help it. Mia's expression hardened, and she told him Leo was her world, that she wouldn't let him come in and shatter the fragile stability she had built. Her words were like a wall of fortitude, and Lucas realized that earning her trust wouldn't come from arguments or promises, but from actions, from time, from showing her and his son that he wasn't the man who had once walked away. That night, Mia sat at her small apartment table after Leo was asleep, her head in her hands as memories flooded her. She remembered the cold look in Lucas's eyes when he accused her of betrayal, the way her world crumbled when he turned his back. She told herself she couldn't trust him again, that she had to protect Leo above all else. Yet a part of her, the part that had watched Lucas's face in the park when he first saw his son, couldn't deny the truth. He had looked at Leo not with arrogance or calculation, but with wonder, sorrow, and desperate love. That expression haunted her almost as much as his betrayal. Lucas, meanwhile, began to change his life. He rescheduled meetings, delegated responsibilities he had once fiercely guarded, and carved out time each day to be near Mia and Leo. At first, Mia refused to let him near, but Leo, innocent and eager, was drawn to him. He asked questions about the man with the same eyes, laughed at his stories, clung to his hand when he offered to walk him home. Every time Mia saw them together, her chest tightened with conflict. She wanted to protect her son, but she also saw how Leo blossomed in his father's presence, how natural their bond seemed, and that frightened her. In the quiet of her nights, Mia wrestled with her heart. She didn't know if she could ever forgive Lucas, but she couldn't deny that her son needed him. And as much as she tried to bury it, she also felt the first stirrings of something she thought had died long ago. The possibility that love, once broken and lost, could still find a way to return. The shared battle for a son's life. The hospital corridors were once again a part of Mia's world, though this time she was not the patient, but the mother of one. Leo had fallen ill with a sudden and terrifying ailment that left his small body weak, his once bright laughter replaced by feverish cries. The doctors spoke in low voices, their eyes serious as they explained the necessity of urgent surgery. Mia sat in the sterile consult room, her hands shaking so violently she could barely hold the pen they gave her to sign the papers. Memories of the past flooded her, of the last time her life had collapsed in a hospital, of Lucas's words and the weight of abandonment, and she felt herself breaking again. This time, however, when she looked up in despair, Lucas was sitting opposite her, his face pale, his jaw clenched, his hand steady as he reached out to take hers. For a moment, she wanted to pull away, still unsure if she could trust him, but his grip was firm. not demanding, simply anchoring her to the present. He spoke with determination, telling her he would cover every expense, that nothing mattered more than Leo's recovery, that no power on earth would stop him from protecting his son. Mia could barely breathe under the flood of fear, but there was something in his voice, a rawness she hadn't heard before, that quieted the storm inside her enough to let her nod. Together they walked into Leo's room, where the boy lay with tubes connected to his tiny body, his skin too pale for a child so full of life. Mia sat on one side of the bed, stroking his hair and whispering promises that he would be all right, while Lucas slumped into the chair on the other side, his large hand gently encompassing Leo's small fingers. The hours stretched endlessly as they waited for the operation to begin. Mia watched Lucas in those moments, the way he remained motionless, his eyes fixed on Leo's face, his lips moving in silent prayers she had never believed him capable of making. She remembered the man who once accused her, who turned away without listening to her pleas, and compared him to the man before her now, broken, terrified, but unwavering in his devotion. When the nurses finally came to take Leo to surgery, Mia's body shook with the urge to collapse, but Lucas caught her before she fell, holding her tightly. For the first time in years, she didn't fight the comfort he offered, because the weight of the fear was too heavy to carry alone. The waiting room became their prison. Minutes stretched into hours, every second scraping at Mia's sanity. She paced the floor until her legs ached, then sat down and covered her face with her hands, only to stand again moments later. Lucas stayed by her side the entire time. He didn't try to silence her sobs or offer empty comforts, but he remained, unyielding, his presence a constant reminder that she no longer carried this burden alone. At one point, when her breathing became ragged, he knelt in front of her and spoke in a low voice, his voice trembling as he admitted his deepest regret. He told her that leaving her years ago had been the worst mistake of his life, that he had punished himself every day since, but that nothing compared to the thought of losing the son he was only just beginning to know. His confession broke something inside her, not because it erased the past, but because she saw in his eyes that he truly meant every word. When the surgeon finally emerged, exhaustion etched onto his face. Mia clutched Lucas's arm so tightly, her nails dug into his skin. The words they had been waiting for came like a blessing. The operation had been successful, and Leo would recover. Mia let out a sob that shook her entire body, collapsing against Lucas's chest as tears of relief streamed down her face. Lucas held her, his own eyes moist, his arms wrapped around her with a fierce protection. In that moment, there were no accusations, no past betrayals, no walls between them. There was only the shared joy of knowing their son would live. Later, when they were finally allowed back into Leo's room, Mia sat by his bed, holding his small hand as he slept peacefully, color slowly returning to his cheeks. She looked up and saw Lucas standing on the other side of the bed, his hand gently stroking Leo's hair, his expression soft and full of a love that was both heartbreaking and beautiful. Their eyes met over their son's sleeping form, and for the first time in years, Mia didn't see the man who had hurt her. She saw the man who had stayed through the longest night of her life, the father who had shown with actions instead of words that he would not abandon them again. Something inside her silently shifted, a fragile but undeniable crack in the armor she had built around her heart. It didn't mean forgiveness had fully arrived, but it meant the possibility was there. She realized that love, though once shattered, could be rebuilt piece by piece when two people chose to fight for it. And as she sat there with Lucas, their hands resting side by side on Leo's blanket, Mia allowed herself to imagine, perhaps for the first time, that a future together was not only possible, but waiting to be claimed. The new promise. When Leo finally came home from the hospital, the apartment felt transformed, not because its walls were brighter or its furniture less worn, but because life had been restored within it. Mia moved through the rooms with a lightness she hadn't felt in years, ushering her son from bed to couch and back again as he slowly regained his strength, his laughter growing louder each day. Lucas was there constantly, not as a guest, but as if he belonged, carrying groceries, cooking in the tiny kitchen even though he had never cooked for himself before, and learning the rhythm of their modest life with humility and patience. Mia watched him with cautious eyes, waiting for the illusion to break, for him to remember the wealth and power that had once made him untouchable. But instead of grand gestures, he offered simple acts, changing bed sheets, fixing a broken chair, reading bedtime stories in a voice so soft it surprised her. It was in these mundane moments that Mia began to see the depth of his transformation. The man who once valued control and perfection above all else now knelt on the floor with crayons, drawing messy castles with Leo, the sleeves of his expensive shirt smudged with color. He no longer seemed like the cold figure who had judged her years ago, but a man stripped of his armor, vulnerable and desperate to hold on to the second chance destiny had given him. Mia wrestled with conflicting emotions, torn between the memories of betrayal and the undeniable evidence of the man he had become. She would catch herself smiling when she heard Leo's laughter ringing through the apartment as Lucas playfully chased him, and then she would quickly look away, reminding herself not to surrender too easily. But deep down, she knew her heart was softening, no matter how fiercely she tried to guard it. One evening, long after Leo was asleep, the two of them sat together in the small living room, the silence between them heavy with unspoken words. Mia looked at the flickering lamp, her hands tightly clasped in her lap, while Lucas leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his gaze fixed on her as if searching for a door that had been closed for too long. Finally, he broke the silence, his voice low but steady. He told her he had spent 5 years convincing himself he was right, that he had buried his guilt under layers of rage. But the moment he saw Leo in the park, everything shattered. He admitted that his success, his wealth, all the power he had clung to had meant nothing compared to the life he had thrown away. With every word, Mia felt her defenses weakening, because she could hear the sincerity in his tone, see the rawness in his eyes. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, but sharp. She told him that words alone couldn't heal what was broken, that love was not something you declared, but something you lived, day by day. She reminded him of the nights she had gone hungry to feed her son, the moments when she had nearly collapsed under the weight of being both mother and father, and how he hadn't been there. Tears welled up in her eyes as she confessed she was terrified of letting him in, terrified that Leo would grow to love him only to be abandoned again. Her honesty sliced the air like glass, and for a moment, Lucas had no response. Then he stood, walked over to her, and knelt at her feet. He took her hands gently, his eyes shining with tears of his own, and promised her not perfection, not grand vows, but presence. He told her he would be there for every scraped knee, every sleepless night, every small victory, and every setback. He swore he wouldn't leave again, not because it was easy, but because they were his family, and nothing mattered more. Mia looked at him, seeing not the millionaire, nor the powerful CEO, but the man who had stayed up in a hospital waiting room, the man who had held his son's hand through the pain, the man who was now willing to kneel on a worn carpet in a modest apartment just to prove his love. Something within her opened, not with the sharpness of old wounds, but with the warmth of healing. Slowly, she lifted her face to meet his eyes, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to whisper the truth she had buried. She told him that she still loved him, that love had never truly died, only hidden beneath layers of pain, and that maybe it was time to let it breathe again. The days that followed felt different. There were still arguments, moments when old pain resurfaced, but now there was also shared laughter among the three of them, dinners eaten together, bedtime stories read as a family. Mia found herself leaning on Lucas without thinking, smiling when his arm naturally slipped around her shoulders. Leo, sensing the change, even if he didn't fully understand it, blossomed with happiness, clinging to both of them as if he had always known this was how life was meant to be. Months later, Lucas asked Mia to marry him again. It wasn't in a grand ballroom or on a faraway island, but in their small apartment, late at night, with Leo asleep in the next room. He held a simple ring in his hand, his voice trembling as he said he wanted to build a life with her, not the life they had once dreamed of, but a new one, stronger because it had been forged through trials. Mia's heart pounded as tears filled her eyes, and though fear still lingered, she found herself nodding, not because she had forgotten the past, but because she believed in the future they could build. Their wedding was quiet and intimate, held in a small garden where Leo proudly carried the rings, and Mia walked toward Lucas in a simple white dress that fluttered in the breeze. When they exchanged vows, there were no promises of perfection, only of choosing each other every day, of never letting pride or fear come between them again. As Lucas kissed her, Mia felt years of pain melt away, replaced by the certainty that she had not only survived, but had found her way back to joy. Leo giggled as they swept him up into their arms, and in that moment, under the golden light of the setting sun, Mia knew that their story, once marked by betrayal and heartbreak, had finally become one of forgiveness, healing, and a love strong enough to last forever. Epilogue: the commitment of every sunrise. The ceremony was the end of their pain, but the beginning of their real work. Lucas and Mia stayed in the small town of Maplewood, making their modest apartment a true home. He had sold off much of his fortune, investing the rest responsibly and ethically. She continued to work part-time at the coffee shop, not out of financial need, but because she loved the sense of independence she had fought so hard to achieve. One afternoon, as the orange light of dusk filtered through the window, Mia was sewing a patch onto Leo's backpack. Lucas watched her from the kitchen table. "I still wonder if we'll ever be completely over it," Mia said quietly, not looking up from her needlework. Lucas stood and walked over to her, kneeling down on the carpeted floor. He took her hand, no longer with the tremor of guilt, but with the steadiness of acceptance. "It's not about being over it, Mia. Scars don't erase. They integrate." He gently stroked her cheek. "Every day I choose to be here, every dinner I cook, every story I read. That is an active choice. That choice is our forever." Mia nodded. He wasn't promising the perfection of a fairy tale, but the consistency of real life. Later, as Leo slept, and the silence filled the house, Mia stepped out onto the balcony. Lucas followed, wrapping her in a protective embrace. "When you told me not to come back, I thought you had killed me," Mia whispered. "And when I found you with Leo, I realized I had died that night, but you had been reborn," Lucas replied. "And I love you for the woman you became without me." They stood there, watching the lights of the small town. There were no grand declarations, only the peace of being together, aware that love wasn't a magical force, but a daily commitment they chose to renew at sunrise. Mia and Lucas didn't have an ending. They had a path forged by truth and the unwavering love for the son who had taught them the true price of presence. How did you like this version? Do you have another story ready? Or would you like me to write a short follow-up? Tuyệt vời. Kết thúc mở open ending sẽ tạo ra một sự dậy dứt và để lại nhiều suy ngẫm về sự chuộc lỗi. Dựa trên cốt truyện đã dịch, đây là một kết thúc mở được viết bằng tiếng Anh, tập trung vào sự bất ổn của lòng tin và chặng đường chuộc lỗi chưa hoàn thành của Lucas. An open ending. The unfinished forgiveness. The spring sun warmed the small, worn porch of Mia's apartment. Leo, fully recovered, was coloring at a low table, his dark head bent in concentration. Lucas sat beside him, his gaze soft as he pointed out colors. The sleeves of his expensive shirt rolled up, a deliberate symbol of his immersion in this modest life. Mia watched them from the kitchen doorway. In the month since Leo's surgery, Lucas had been unwavering. He was present for every mundane chore, every difficult conversation, and every doctor's appointment. He had systematically dismantled his old life, selling off businesses, choosing this quiet, uncertain existence over his empire. He had proven with deeds, not words, that the man who betrayed her was gone. Yet, as she looked at him, the old pain was a dull, persistent ache in her chest. She saw the father Leo adored, the devoted partner who stayed up late fixing broken toys and reading stories. But she also remembered the frozen face in the hospital corridor 5 years ago, the swift, brutal judgment that nearly cost them everything. Later that night, as Lucas prepared to leave for his drive back to the city for a final business meeting, they stood together by the fence. The air was cool and heavy with the scent of wet earth. "I have to go to close this last chapter," Lucas said, his voice quiet. "When I come back, it's for good. I'm ready to propose, Mia. I want to give Leo my name, and I want to give you back the life I stole." He looked at her, his blue eyes earnest, but lacking the arrogance she once knew. Mia looked out at the dark street. She saw the truth of his commitment, but she also saw the immense risk of trusting him completely again. Her survival instinct, honed over 5 brutal years, fought against the fragile hope that his love offered. "Lucas," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "you have earned my trust in your actions, but not yet in my heart. The past is not a chapter you can simply close. It's a part of our story now." She paused, taking a breath. "I won't stop you from coming back, but you need to know. When you return, the fight for my forgiveness will begin again. I love the man you are now, but I haven't forgotten the man you were then." Lucas absorbed her words, not with frustration, but with a somber nod. He didn't argue or try to persuade her. He simply looked at the house, at the window of Leo's room. "I understand," he finally said. "I'll be back on Friday, and I'll fight for that forgiveness for the rest of my life if I have to." He reached out, not to hug her, but to gently touch her cheek. Then he turned and walked to his car, leaving the modest, warm glow of their home behind. Mia stood at the fence, watching the taillights disappear down the road. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling the wild, uncertain beat of her heart. Did he drive back to his old life to finally sever ties? Or would the temptations of power and the shadows of the past call him away again? Would her love truly be enough to overcome the memory of his betrayal? She didn't know. The only thing she knew for certain was that the outcome of their story, the fate of their second chance, rested entirely on the actions of the man who was now speeding toward the city, and the enduring strength of the woman he had left waiting. The door was open, but the future was entirely unwritten.